So the design process has a number of steps that we follow. Generally, you start with the procurement phase. We've talked a lot about that, and that's where you're being selected for a project, you're pursuing a project. Once you are awarded a project, the next sort of micro phase is the contracting piece, and that's where we talked about contract structures, but you're going to sit down with the owner and negotiate what the contract is going to be, the fee, the terms, duration, schedule, all these sorts of aspects, the members of your team, etc. Once that contract is signed, then you're generally given a notice to proceed, or NTP is the abbreviation for that, and you'll start into the project. Most projects start with a programming phase. Some projects you actually do programming. Others do something that's called, what we often will call program validation. And I'll briefly describe the difference. So in the programming phase, that's where you sit down with an owner, you interview them, and you tease out all the parts and pieces that are going to go into a given building, how it's going to be used, how they're going to operate it, what are the types of spaces they need. For a very simplistic example, if you think of a house, some houses you need a kitchen, a few bathrooms, a few bedrooms, a living room, a garage, something like that. But some are very different. Some houses might need 7 bedrooms or 10 bedrooms, or we've done houses with art galleries in them, or special swimming pools or other specialty spaces. And so that's really what a program is about. It's understanding what are the parts and pieces of a building, and what's the key information about how those parts and pieces will work. How do they interrelate with each other? In some cases, you want spaces to be right adjacent to each other. In other cases, you specifically want things to not be nearby each other. So that's a pure programming phase. A lot of times in our projects, in our public projects, the owner has already developed a basic program. They provide that to us, and then we do a program validation. And so in that case, we'll take the program they've previously developed and basically run through it with them and ask them questions. And it's to verify or check that everything is correct and that nothing has changed. Often in the case of public projects, entities change their operations quite a bit. And so sometimes if a program's a year old or a year and a half or 2 years old, there may be some things that have changed that we need to update. And so in that program validation or programming phase, we're going to establish the basis for the project, and generally we'll develop a deliverable, a book or something like this, that'll talk about all these parts and pieces that we can then carry forward and always check against that and make sure we're on the right track. Aside from that, sometimes at the same time, we'll do what you might call a concept design phase. And this is a very preliminary, basic idea of what the project might be. It might be some hand sketches. In our case, Eddie or Brian or the designers will come in and they'll start to vision what the project might look like. Very basic, very few drawings. It's just getting sort of the general sense of what it's going to be. Then you would move into sort of the 3 formal design phases. There's one called schematic design, there's one called design development, and there's one called construction documents. So in the case of schematic design, you are taking that initial concept and that program, and you're starting to flesh out what it's really going to look like. So you're developing the initial floor plan, you're probably developing a basic building section or something like this, and basic elevations, the basic parts and pieces. And what's great in this phase is you're working with the owner and you're getting feedback, am I on the right track? is this generally in budget? It's very high level. It's usually a fairly thin set of drawings, but it's just that real basic stuff. You might bring in some consultant work, and what I mean by that is you might have real basic structural information. Is it a steel building or a concrete building? You might have real basic mechanical or electrical information. Where's the big equipment going to go? Then you move into the design development phase, and that's where you take those initial assumptions and you start to layer in additional information. So now you're getting a little more specific in the planning. You're starting to see the doors and the windows, and you might start to see the main building systems working their way through the building. You know, where's the primary ductwork going to go? How is the electrical systems going to distribute through the building? How's the structural framing going to work? So you develop that, and you start to see more sections, you see more interior elevations and that sort of thing. And then at the end of that, often you'll have, if it's a CM at risk project or a design build project, you'll get pricing feedback, you'll get constructability feedback, you'll get owner feedback as you're interacting with them. So again, you're knowing you're on the right track. Then you shift into the construction documents. These are the drawings that ultimately the project will be built from. So these are high specificity, high detail. This is where the actual construction details start to come in. You have the various schedules, the door schedules, window schedules, finish schedules, equipment schedules. You'll have detailed interior elevations. You'll have information about millwork and roofing and partition types, door details, window details, all of these different elements that a contractor needs to build a set of build a project. Often that also will serve as a construction permit set, because in most cases you need a building permit. And so that'll get submitted to the jurisdiction, whether it's the city, whether it's the state in the case of a university, or the federal government in the case of those types of projects. And then things start to sort of split apart a little bit depending on what you're doing. In that design build environment, that's where you go out to bid, like I described. Like I said, we don't do a lot of that anymore, but in that case, you would put it out to bid. The bidders will look at the drawings, they may ask some questions, you'll go through a phase of identifying who that low bidder is going to be, and then you get them under contract and start into construction. In the work that we typically do, you'll have the GMP phase where they'll set that pricing information, and then after that you start into the construction phase. And that's an important phase for us as well, and what we generally call it is construction administration. And that's where the architect has a responsibility to work with the contractor and the owner to be involved during construction. We're going to address questions that come up. We're going to help observe and see that the design intent is being carried out. We aren't responsible for building the building, but we want to make sure that the vision, the design intent is being upheld. We want to make sure that the owner is getting the quality level that they expect and deserve. And so we'll do observations during the course of the project while it's under construction. We'll have weekly construction meetings, we'll do site visits and field reports, we'll respond to questions that come from the contractor, and then when the project is finished, often there will be what's called a closeout phase, and that's where we might do record documentation of what was built. We might review the final operations manuals that the contractor will put together, and do those final bits and pieces of basically finishing off the project. You might do some commissioning, you might do a lead submission, things like that. That's for sustainability purposes. And you finish out that project, and then the project is done. And then hopefully everything is good, and on you go to the next.